The rising water levels in the lakes along the Great Rift Valley is a phenomenon of major concern because it hugely affects communities. In Buringo County, the rising levels of Lake Bogoria and Lake Baringo have displaced people and ruined their livelihoods. Simon Oniwere, a professor of spatial and environmental planning at Kenyatta University, has been involved in studies on environmental risk hazard vulnerability assessment.
Apart from being in the area of using satellite technology and GIS tools to understand what's happening on the Earth, I also guide in the area of disaster risk management. So I'm also in the area of disaster risk management. I've been in that area for some time now, particularly since 2008. And it's actually shortly after that we had a drought of 2009. And that's helped me, being in that area has helped me now to understand the connection between hazards, the risk from hazards, the disasters that can occur, and the vulnerability of either communities or the land or objects, that the features, to certain risks that are within the environment. That the impact of the lake level rise was witnessed in 2011, and myself I witnessed in 2012 when Salabani was underwater. Has Salabani been, has the water gone back and Salabani released? No. The water has instead continued to rise all this time, and as you are aware, it has risen until it has even submerged Lake 92, and I think some people call it Lake 94. And now that water is in that valley, the system of wetlands that are connecting now Lake Baringo to Lake Bogoria. There are a system of wetlands, including Kisibor Swamp, and the Loboi Swamp. So those systems of wetlands, the water is actually approaching those systems of wetland. And in the meantime, the waters of Bogoria are also approaching the wetlands. So having seen that possibilities much earlier in 2018, we then embarked on an understanding, a study to find out what possibilities could be there for them to match. And geologically, we realized that Lake Bogoria is sitting in a graben. Lake Baringo is also sitting in a graben, also is not really visible, but it's also sitting in a graben, but it's a little bit wide and a little bit shallow in the lower end. If you look at the satellite images, you'll see the escarpments that die off into the plains of Lake Baringo. But the same escarpments are traced now in Loruk area. And the same lines of faulting are traced in Olkokwe Island. If you look at Olkokwe Island, or if you look at the islands in the lake, if you remember the old islands, and if you have been there, you will have seen that the islands are like escarpment blocks. And those blocks are basically fault blocks that are raised to form fault blocks, and then there are grabens, depression areas. And we saw this when you looked at the image of Loruk, that there were areas of depression and there were areas of raised ground, some of which have now been turned into an island. So knowing that possibility is there, and when we did the mapping in 2013, we actually found one toilet that had been dug somewhere near where they used to have a slaughterhouse in Loruk. And the waters of Baringo were entering that toilet, never filling up. That made us understand that actually the water is following the fault line and probably emerging somewhere out in where you have the hot springs to the north, and eventually entering Suguta Valley. This is same structures that we could utilize to actually channel the waters of Lake Baringo so that they don't continue filling, but instead flow into Sukuta Valley. After all, Baringo is being maintained fresh by flowing under. Now we can accelerate the flow by creating a canal at the top on the surface so that the water can go out into Sukuta Valley. And the water can be used actually in Sukuta Valley to do irrigation. So the river discharges have been having a lot of water, albeit the water is silted. It's just brown water, and then which also tells you that the catchment is not conserved. It's losing a lot of fertile soil, and taking this soil into the lake, therefore, shallowing the basin itself. So Lake Baringo Basin has been shallowing over time because of the siltation from both Berkera, Olarabel, and the Molo River, and Endau. Do you know how much silt goes from Endau? I think you have been in Endau area. It's that river that crosses over after Margat. And you have seen that it can bring in rocks, silt, and so on, and just throw it on the road and block the road for months. The same silt actually goes to the lake and feeds the lake basin. So the lake basin has been shallowing over a period of time, and it cannot contain as much water as it used to do before. And no wonder then the waters have been flooding. But the waters have also risen significantly. By rising, I mean the depth. In fact, we measured the depth the last time, it was 14 meters. The water has risen up 14 meters.
Lake Buringo, as all other lakes in the Rift Valley, is under severe stress from poor watershed management. Deforestation and overgrazing has made worse the water runoff with significant losses of topsoil. This has led to sedimentation and flooding. Communities now face livelihood losses and increased conflict over scarce resources. There is good news, though. The European Union is funding a program called the Strengthening Climate Resilience in the Lake Baringo Watershed. Buringo County Governor Benjamin Chaboy says urgent mitigation measures are being made to stop further degradation of the land.
But the real solution is doing a check dam upstream. And then also we need to do what you call afforestation. We need to work with the neighbors here. We come and plant trees along the riparian areas so that we can begin to prevent any more soil erosion. And as you are aware, we are working with the European Union, including the governments of Germany, Italy, and France, to be able to address the challenge of land degradation in this county in general, and to see if we can solve the problem of the Lake Baringo and Lake Bogoria watershed. And so that we can only do by managing the flow of water upstream through environmental measures that can mitigate against the climate change which has caused all this. There's nothing else. This is just climate change.
The tremendous flooding of the Buringo lakes have been witnessed over the last 10 years, from 2013. Dr. Lydia Olaka, a geologist and lecturer at the Technical University of Kenya, has made extensive studies on the Rift Valley lakes.
This phenomenon started around, around 2013. I think around 2013 is when we started seeing a rise in the lakes. So it rose through around 2018, and then it got down again. And then around 2020, again, we started seeing an increase. And it's been just a steady increase in many of those lakes. Because also the trend of rising of the lakes is a bit different from one lake to another because of the basin that we have. Some areas are larger, some areas are flatter, some areas are steeper. So you see, if it is steep, you see a high jump in level, but if it is broad, then you see more expansive extent of the lakes. So it's actually, if we look at the lakes in Kenya, they have increased between 40 to even 80% the area that they had. So they're actually taking more area compared to what they used to have. So what could have caused this? I think so. There are many studies that have been done. This is a thing that you don't just say, this is what I think. We really need the studies there. So there are some studies that have been done, but they still need to do a little bit more so that we can be able to monitor. So we are using our expert knowledge of what we know, that how climate impacts the lakes, and also how we have seen in the history. So there are a number of issues. First of all, we can say that there's a number of issues have been raised by people. There's a climate issue. People have raised tectonic issue. People have also said something about erosion, sedimentation, and things like that. We can look at each of them and based on our knowledge say what we think would be the most probable cause for this, because if it is sediments, we should be able to see that. If it is climate, we should be able to see the evidence of that being the strongest, and the same with tectonics or any other human activities like drilling, which is being raised. So first of all, let's just look back and say, why would a lake rise? So because these are closed lakes, they work like a basin. If there's more, they are balanced by an input and output. If more water comes in than goes out, the level will rise. If less comes in than goes out, then it is going to go down. So if we are getting more out than what is coming in, then the levels are going to lower. But if whatever comes in is balanced by what goes out, we have a level. What we are seeing is an increase. So it means whatever is coming in is not being removed as fast as it was, and that's why the levels keep going up. So far, many of the studies that we can talk about that have looked at the climate actually point towards the climate issue. It's about, and the climate is not only rainfall, it is a balance between the rainfall and evaporation, because these lakes are found in an arid environment, and whatever rains, the amount of rainfall that we have on the lake is a third of what evaporates. So if you have like rainfall 600 ml, what goes out is 1,800. They're dry, so normally evaporation is higher. Yeah, but we have seen a level that is, and evaporation has been the main component of removing water out. So it seems like our evaporation has gone down. And that is why we are not, whatever is coming in is not being balanced by what is coming out. So we have higher in and lower quantities going out. So eventually we remain with much more. So we can mostly point towards climate. If we look at the studies that have been done, we've seen an increase in rainfall by even 100 or even 300% of what we've been getting. The bit which we have not really monitored very well is evaporation, because there not many of the lakes have been are monitored in that way, but we can be able to use satellite, though not very precise, but they can give us some information. On the issue of sediments, many people have talked about the changes in land use, and maybe the sediments have really been high. If we look at some of these lakes like Buringo that have gone 7 meters high, 7 meters of sediments is quite a lot. That is, yeah, it's quite a lot. And we don't have anything like that. We know, of course, we have sediments, but that is not really the main thing that would be driving whatever we are actually seeing. And it's not only in the lakes. Even where people have groundwater, they are seeing the water levels go up. So it cannot be sediments that is causing our lake levels to go up only. Yeah, we can say yes, maybe because of the land use. Now there's runoff is faster, so it rains and it goes faster into the lake instead of staying or infiltrating into the ground. But it cannot be that sediment, because of the high sediment load, we have these lake levels. Even again, once we have sediments in the lake, usually with the water column, the sediments are compressed almost to a third. Yeah, so it is compressed. So to see something that probably would be almost over 20 meters when it's compressed to 7, I don't think that's many mountains. So the sediment component is an issue, but not an issue in directly making that high lake level. It could be just because of it changes the way runoff comes into the lake, or how fast we get the flood peak, and also it affects the infiltration into the groundwater, the sediment. And then tectonics, that's a different issue, because what we have in the rift is that we have an extension. So many times people say things are being squeezed so that the water is coming up. What we have in the rift is an extension, it's not a squeezing of anything. And I don't think that is a main component in doing that. And again, if we would have that, then the rifting would be accompanied by many other things. We should be seeing there's also some magmatic activity, not like magma coming, but we would be able to see a change in the water quality. Yeah, so the water quality and the gases and everything will change. But what we've been doing in our studies, we see a dilution in the chemistry. And what can only cause a dilution is rainfall, which is more dilute. Yeah, so when you have more rainfall, it dilutes most of those areas. And that is why even in areas that were very saline and we didn't have some fishes like Nakuru, now people are almost getting freshwater fish to those places. And the areas or the ecosystems that were very saline and supported, like the flamingos, we now see a shift that sometimes the flamingos don't even stay there because it cannot support their food anymore. So that is the issue with the tectonics. So because of the dilution and because we are seeing even groundwater increasing in all the other areas, then and the data we have from the climate, then we can only say that we have had an increase in the rainfall. So it's a climate component.
Whatever way you look at the emerging environmental crisis in Buringo, one thing is clear. Urgent measures are needed to stop human causes to the rising of the lakes.
It's a conversation that has been there, and myself have been involved in researching that conversation of the water towers, Kenya water towers. When we talk of water towers, in the engineering context, it means a raised tank, Kokoju. But in the natural context, it means a raised ground that is serving to catch water and hold it and supply it to the rivers for a prolonged period of time. So if you think about it, it means that where the rivers are coming from, we need to store more water in that land, in the soil, in the aquifers, to allow the aquifers supply the rivers at a regulated manner. The land will regulate it itself in a way that the rivers are sustained in flow and the water is clean, so that we don't have this issue of silted rivers flowing into the lakes. So first, we'll control soil erosion and we'll maintain soil fertility and therefore increase productivity of the land. Second, we'll store water, then we'll have regulated water supply into the environment and also into the communities that will need the water, rather than having these flash floods that fill the basins. We know we have a dam called Chemeron Dam, and unfortunately Chemeron Dam was silted long time ago. Why? Because it was done without a plan on catchment management strategy. In fact, all our dams in Kenya are done without as much as thinking about what we need to do to where the water is coming from, so that we don't silt the dams. And you know they are silted because as soon as it rains, Kenya Power, for example, says that the Masinga and the other dams are already full. So they are not serving the purpose of storing the water. They are not serving the purpose of reducing surface flow into the downstream communities, who then experience flooding every time it rains. That should not happen. That water that is running when it is raining should be retained in the catchment, infiltrating the ground and be stored in the aquifers. If we do that, that's then when you have a water tower, a natural water tower that has received rain, stored the rainwater in the aquifers or in the soil, and then it releases it slowly at a regulated way into the rivers, and the rivers will see them flowing throughout the year and having clean water flowing into the lakes. That's what we mean by catchment management. It means then that we need designated use. You cannot just put anybody there to do anything they want. It has to be a designated use. You have to tell people that if you are living in this ecosystem, in this slope, this is the only thing you can do in this slope. It's not that it's not enough, it is enough. Because if you do forestry, you can sell forestry and still get your food products. If you are doing what do you call it, shrub cultivation, Then you have your shrubs which you can harvest for the cows. Instead of taking the cows to the hills or the goats to the hills to eat, you harvest them and bring them to zero grazing. That way you conserve your catchment, and conserving the catchment, then it means it is suitable for holding the water back to infiltrate into the ground. You allow the community, you take the communities through a training program that helps them to understand what catchment management strategy means. And because the communities are living in the catchment, they are doing development activities. So there's a level of development they are doing. Either they see farming as their development, or they see livestock keeping as their development, or they see a market center coming up as a development, and so on. So there's a way the community sees a development. But each time there is a development, it brings about a problem. Each time you invade or you move into an ecosystem that has not been utilized before, you bring about change in that ecosystem. The community understands that if I do this farming, the following will happen. But because they think that if they don't do it, somebody will take up the land, then they do it anyhow. Only. The communities themselves can tell you how best they can cultivate the land so that they don't lose soil. You cannot tell them that they are coming to give you a plan on how to conserve the soil. The only thing we need to agree with them is that as you cultivate on this hill, no soils will leave your land. No waters will leave your land. Retain all the water in your land. And you see, they will tell you how, then you engage with them to tell you how they will retain the water in their land. Because the next thing you are going to do, we have allowed you to stay there, but no water should leave your land. So they will tell you what they will do to retain the water in their land. If they retain the water in their land, then they can continue cultivating. That's why when you go to Mongolia and other countries, they have cultivated up to the top of the hills. The water doesn't go away. It remains there to cultivate the rice paddies. As here, the water comes, off it goes. And how they maintained them, they have dug trenches and they have dug things like the constructed gabions and so on, and they retain the water at the back of those benches. As we don't create benches to retain the water on the benches, and that's a problem.